Lancaster City Council Finance Committee. Call the meeting to order at 6 p.m. The first item we have on the agenda tonight is Resolution 15922, a resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and to amend the certificate of appropriations with the county auditor and the natural gas fund coming out of service. Ms. Sitterly.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if Curtis wants to address this request.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. Back in 2021, when we did the 2022 budget, what we were looking at that time, we were looking at about $4.50 to $5 gas. The purchase of natural gas is one of the major components of the natural gas budget. The other being transportation. Well, throughout the year, we couldn't have anticipated that Russia would do what they did and try to invade countries and send prices sky high. So, now on average, we're looking at $7 or $8 gas, and we got a shortfall of about $800,000. We need to appropriate from our unencumbered. We have the funds. We just need to increase that expense account. Any questions? We are asking for one reading here so we can go ahead and adjust our POs and get everything done ready for the invoice.
Anyone have any questions? Okay, what's your pleasure?
I'll be asking for one reading, and Mr. Matlin's my second.
So we'll suspend on 15922, and Mr. Matlin will be the second. Next item on the agenda, Resolution 16022, a resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend certificate with the county auditor in the CBDG loan repayment revolving fund coming out of economic development. Mr. Ailes.
So my first resolution as a new city councilman is for a $28.
Yes, for $28.
That's why you're going. We'll ask to suspend on that.
Yeah, it looks pretty straightforward. $28 to balance the budget.
Yep.
And Mr. Schoonover's the second on that. Suspension on 160, and it's pretty straightforward. Anybody have any questions on that one? All right, thank you. Next item on the agenda is Resolution 16122, a resolution authorizing the SSD to enter into a request for qualifications, request for proposal, negotiate and enter into a contract for services to facilitate the design and installation of a new HVAC system for the police building. That is coming out of finance, and I think Chief Snyder's here. Do you want to address that real quick for us?
Thank you, members of council. This is in relation to the ongoing HVAC system at the police department. As you know, it's a pretty hefty cost to replace that system, which is needed. We initially were going to do an emergency legislation, and then once the temporary cooling worked out, that was no longer needed. So then we knew we had to go out to bid. Initially, we believed the engineering price to request bids was going to be under the financial obligation that you would not need counsel for. However, the price is well over that. So we are asking for an RFQ, RFP to be able to go out to bid on this project.
Okay, we've talked about this HVAC system issue before, and it desperately needs replaced. Does anyone have questions for Chief Snyder on this? Okay, thank you. Ms. Kreitz, will you be the second on that?
Yes, sir.
And we are asking for suspension. We'd like to get this rolling. This building's been without a proper HVAC system all of last summer and probably needed it well before that.
Now our heat's out.
Oh, another
So we
issue.
had heat out for a week, and we just got that restored here, so just trying to see if there's anything worse that could happen for Chief.
Do we believe the heat's fixed?
We do at this time,
Permanently?
yes.
Okay, good, thank you.
But we will have that evaluated when we get this in here too, so,
Great.
just to let you know.
Okay, so we will suspend on that. And then the next item on our agenda is Resolution 16222, a resolution authorizing the mayor to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Ohio EPA Water Pollution Control Loan Fund Program. Coming out of water pollution, Mr. James.
Thank you, Chairman Daniel. I think I'll yield some time to Ms. Denise Cruz to give us a little more explanation of this.
Good evening. as our projects move on. This is a loan application for the Campground Road Pump Station replacement and the lateral D trunk sewer Phase 2, which serves the US 33 service area and development out there. We need to have a application on January 2nd. We're looking to advertise the project in late March, early April, and we'll have actual costs then as we wrap up into the loan at the end of June.
Any questions for Denise? Anything else, Mr. James?
We were going to ask for suspension tonight in order to meet that deadline for the application, and Ms. Teener will be my second.
Great. Mrs. Teener's second, and we'll ask for suspension on 16222. The next item on the agenda is Resolution 16322, a resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to enter into a change order for the concentrate line cleaning project coming out of water wastewater. Mr. James?
Thank you again, Chairman Daniel. This is the infamous concentrate line from the South Water Plant, and Denise didn't even need to walk away from the podium. So Denise, it's all yours.
I apologize. I did not get the change order until Friday afternoon, and I bolted straight up in bed on Saturday night and went, I gotta walk in legislation for this. This is for a change order for additional work we asked for on the concentrate line. We had to add some additional access points, which meant cutting the line, installing some connectors, and installing some manholes, as well as cleaning some additional areas that we didn't initially think we had to clean. First of all, thanks to Law Director Hall and Clerk Sandy for getting this through for me. And second, I normally would have let this go, but this is the last week that I can pay invoices for this year. So we like to pay our contractors. They stay happy with us and are willing to work with us. So I would like to get this paid.
Any questions for Denise?
You look puzzled, David.
Do me. It's my normal state of being.
Mr. James, who's your second?
My second on that will be Mr. Matlin, and just as a comment, I think the performance of this line has increased greatly with the efforts of all the people at the water treatment area. Denise's, even though it's caused her to lose sleep at night, I'm glad you're able to get it in here. We're going to ask for suspension tonight as well.
All right, suspension on 16322. Mr. Matlin, the second.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item we have on the agenda is Resolution 14922, STAR. That is updated 2023 budget. I thought I would take the opportunity to ask Mayor Schaeffer to address changes within the budget that we should know about, Mr. Mayor.
No, actually, there were very few changes from the original budget that was submitted, and most of them have to do with updated information that was received after the first budget was prepared, like different estimates. I know in GIS, we learned that we had to redo our cartograph software and buy 50 more users. Another example might be a more expensive bid for a sanitation truck that was received afterwards, and all the line items that were changed were similar to that, and they are all marked on the budget, so you can see all of them easily.
So this is an opportunity to, if you've reviewed the budget, which I'm sure you have, because I've had many phone calls and conversations with several of you. Questions on the amended budget or the budget in general? Mr. Matlin.
Something I missed when I met with the mayor, the tree commission. Looks like we're adding somebody in the tree commission, is that correct?
Actually, we're taking a person that was an employee, or was an outside contract through West Staff, and they're gonna become an employee. I think there is an addition of a part-time person also as
We
a
had
backup.
one, the arborist was all we had, correct?
We had the arborist and an outside contracted person. Yeah.
Additional questions? Mr. Ayers?
The GIS department, I missed it in our IT committee, but are we funding them solely through the general fund, or are they funded similar to how the IT department's funded through some reimbursement?
They're funded like the IT department.
Okay.
They get service funds from other departments that use their services heavily.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions? Mrs. Gainer?
Actually, I do. Actually, I have a couple. But with the CDBG, so the $150,000. Oh, Linda's here. So are we hiring somebody before do we have any, I don't know, projects in the works for the $150,000 grant already? And then there's the lead-based grant. How many have we done? How many houses have we taken care of with that grant already this year?
I think that'd be better if Mrs. Disser could answer those questions, the detailed questions.
We have 7 houses in the pipeline for that, for the lead hazard control grant. We have 14 in the pipeline for the Healthy Homes Production Grant.
Okay, and so if, let's say, do you think that the lead grant is, something we should continue? Do you think we're gonna have enough people that's gonna want to do that? To make it worth our while with hiring people and that type of thing?
The people that are being proposed to be hired are not specifically for that grant. So the staff for that grant are covered by that grant, not by the general fund. But yes, I do believe that we will be able to spend those funds this year.
Thank you.
Additional questions on the budget? All right, seeing none, this is on third reading tonight.
Excuse me.
So, and Mrs. Kreitzer, the second on that.
Yes.
The next item on the agenda is Resolution 15622. It's a resolution authorizing the safety director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract with a qualified contractor for the 2023 street paving program. Mr. Schoonover.
Yes, thank you. I got a phone call, I think it was Friday, discussing this potential change to the advertising for bids for the 2023 program. If I can get Mr. Shank to come up and kind of just give us an idea of why this is being proposed and how it could benefit the Parks Department for their paving of Rising Park, correct?
That's right. Yes. So, the engineering department, we kind of help out other departments, and a lot of times I'm up here asking to go out to bid for the paving program, which is for the street department. Well, we're doing the same thing with the Parks Department, and they've asked us to bid that project for them, to be funded by them. I went to the Parks Board last week to add alternate bids to the project that we're already doing, and we're going to bid out in January, and that's what the resolution was before you 2 weeks ago, and we're amending that to add Rising Park to that, and then we're going to do the front loop and the back loop, and there'll be alternates, and we'll get those bids in, and the Parks Board can take a look at that and decide if they want to award those or not award those, so they'll have the option. We think we hope, maybe they'll get better bids, lumped all into one project, a larger project, that's the hope. And it makes it a little more easy administratively. It's just one project that we have to bid, which I like.
Any questions for Mr. Shank? Go ahead, Mr. Matlin.
And to clarify, this Parks money that's paying for their side, it's not the 3 mil money that's paying for it.
That's right. We'll bid it out separately, And then in the contract, it's all unit price based. We'll have our inspectors out there, as they do always, tracking how much asphalt's going over there and how much is going over here. And it'll be based on what actually gets put down in the park and then over here on the street side. We've done things like this before. It's not uncommon. We have water, like we had, with the water department, we put some pavement repairs in the project and just tracked that separately and had a different purchase order.
Any additional questions?
I might have a
Yes, Mr.
short add to that. Per the Ohio Revised Code, we cannot use city funds to pave park streets. So it has to come from the parks money. Unfortunately, due to the parks levy that passed last year, they now have the funding to do that.
And I would just add, that was one of the items discussed on the park levy campaign, was paving of Rising Park. So, any other questions on this legislation? All right, thank you. Mr. Schoonover, this is on second reading tonight, so.
So-
this is just an amendment tonight.
So I'm gonna make a motion to replace it to the star version, and then suspend, and then pass. So you'll hear me talking for like 5 minutes at one time, so I apologize in advance.
All right, so, yeah, that'll be second reading tonight on 13622. Mr. James, you're the second on that one.
That's correct.
The next thing we have is ordinance 3322 star. It's the pay ordinance for management and professional personnel, and it's amended tonight to be replaced with the star version. Mr. Ehlers, this is your amendment. Would you please discuss it?
Yeah, so, in the old version, it had that the deputy service safety director would start, June 23rd. To me, that's just a little far out. I think that November 8th sounds good, especially with some of the discussions I had regarding it. I think November 8th is a better time.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Ehlers' proposal? Mr. Matlin?
I understand the thinking, because you're dealing with an election and you're not sure. And typically the service director comes with the mayor, and we're going through a mayoral election. However, we're talking about a city that's, $100 million a year with hundreds of employees and things happening, and it's a big learning curve. So for me, if it works out to where it's gonna be obvious who is gonna be in the job, I think the more time in the job before Mr. Martin retires would be better. And we'll go back to what we did for the treasurer's job, in that, Mr. Wolfinger was so valuable, and he is, that the new guy is gonna get the benefit of him being around, and we passed legislation not just to raise the treasurer's salary, but to let Mr. Wolfinger come and stay around and get a small amount of money to help. And honestly, I think the service director's job is probably more important, when it comes to personnel issues and that. So I would love to give the current mayor, the opportunity to hire that assistant service director as soon as he could, if it looks like it's gonna be right, and give him the freedom to do it that way, if it works out it's gonna be. And like I said, I understand Mr. Ehlers, the election, and if it looks like we've got 2-3 people running for mayor, then I get it. We should wait. But if it's not, then there ought to be some freedom in there.
Any other? Yes, Mr. Ehlers?
I understand that, and I think that we do need training. I would just, point out, there's still 2 months worth of training. However, to me, I don't think it matters whether there's 1 person running, 3 people running, 4 people running. If you're asking someone who may be your next potential mayor to appoint someone in June, that's unethical. They're not elected, it's a mayor-elected position. For someone to work with someone who might be to appoint, that to me appears to be unethical, and the semantics of it just don't look good.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Mr. James?
One other comment, maybe June is too soon. I would agree with that. But November is too late, in my estimation. You've got how many contracts coming up? Five contracts that need to be negotiated. Can that person, no matter how sharp they are, get up to speed in 2 months? That would be my concern.
Point taken. Mr.
One
Mallon?
thing, and you're assuming that the current service director will be here for November, December, when it's not uncommon for somebody that's retiring to take vacation, to use time up at the end of the year, which I don't know what Mr. Martin's doing, or if he would be. I'm sure he would answer the phone, but you can't guarantee he's gonna be here, for just my opinion. I haven't talked to him about it.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
So I do appreciate Mr. Ayler's perspective on this, but the service safety director's job is a huge job, and Paul has been doing it for many years. I'm not even sure how many, as long as I can remember, he's been the service safety director. And, we have 5 union contracts that need to be negotiated this year, as Mr. James said. Negotiations may start as early as August. And it's crucial, I believe, that the new service safety director should participate in that for the experience and to start getting involved with union relations, which is a big deal for the city of Lancaster. In addition, obviously, the service safety director serves at the pleasure of the mayor. And this job couldn't be filled unless the identity of the new mayor is known and that person makes the selection, because there is no way that I, as the current mayor, could make that appointment knowing that it may change, and it would be a complete waste of time and money if that were to happen. So I would encourage something earlier than November. Certainly, it's up to the pleasure of whoever is the new mayor when that position is filled and who fills it.
Other comments or questions? Yes, Ms. Graves?
Could we not bump it back to the date of the last date for an independent to file?
I think you could. It's just, I think asking anyone who's not elected to the position just poses a risk of being unethical.
So I would comment this for your consideration. The budget is unchanged. So Mr. Ayler's amendment sets a date. Our budget would still be in place, allowing us to change that date should we determine that we could or would, if that's our pleasure. So I understand his amendment. I understand the discussion. I agree wholeheartedly with the mayor that, that is a huge job. And this happens to be a vital year for a new safety director coming on and one retiring, and the changeover is going to be, pretty tough period. However, I don't think Mr. Ayler's amendment takes that option from us at a later time, should we see it as being appropriate. Just my comments. Any other comments, questions? All right, Mr. Ayler's, that's an amendment tonight. You're gonna make that motion. Who's your second?
Becky.
All right. And Mrs. Kreitz, after they make the amendment, if it passes, I'll make the motion to pass and gross, and you'll second that one.
Yes.
All right. Moving on, departmental updates. Are there any departmental updates? Yes, Ms. Disler.
Well, our IT didn't work, so we're gonna go old school. And just quickly, as copies run off. Let's see, get rid of 6. Yeah, take one.
I like it. I don't need one. I'll get the one from Dawn.
unless you have enough. Okay.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Linda Berge-Disser. I'm the Director of Community Development. 2 weeks ago, there were questions about the Community Development Department and our vision for the future, so I thought I would take a few minutes to clarify what we do and where we're heading. One way to illustrate that is our revenue. On the second page, you can see our growth has been significant but incremental since 2019. Did you get one back in?
Yes, somebody locked the door.
They're probably trying to get in the main street or the Broad Street entrance.
Oh,
Was that door locked when you came in, Tom? Obviously not.
Oh, no.
You made it in.
The Broad Street one or the alley?
Ally?
The normal.
Okay, I'm thinking they're trying to get into the front. Sorry.
No worries.
You can go ahead. She'll be-
Okay, thanks. Okay, so you can see on this page that the blue shades are the non-competitive funds. So these are the funds that we receive without applying for them, such as CDBG and COVID-related grants through the CARES Act and American Rescue Plan. The green shades are competitive grants that we've applied for, like Lead Hazard Control Grant and Healthy Homes Production Grant. The yellow funds are general funds. So first, we have received those for our grants work, and in 2023, the additional funds that are proposed in this budget. You can also see at the bottom the incremental growth in our personnel. How does that break down for our staff? The next page illustrates how funds from each grant source are distributed through our staff positions. We have a percentage for each of our staff people. And if any grant source was to be discontinued, we would have time to bring in other funding to replace it, or we could reorganize our department. We have a couple people who are close to retirement, and this is how we would avoid laying people off. And on that, you can also see the general funds, where those positions would go. Mrs. Teener, you had asked about that. And then you can see for that HHP manager position, that's 100% paid for by that grant. Okay, so next page, what do we do? Community is the key word in community development, and we are engaging the community in two ways. First, I created an advisory committee of residents and community leaders to provide feedback to our department on programs and services. And the second, I lead Community Development 101 sessions at the library. We've been doing that quarterly to inform residents of our work. We have grant funding to make health and safety-related home improvements for owner-occupied and rental housing. We boost economic development through small businesses to create and retain jobs. We support nonprofits that provide affordable housing-related services. And as of the last few years, I've been working with our nonprofit partners to create new units of affordable rental housing to address the need for affordable rents and the need for housing for homeless people. Our department also, that is on this page of community development activities. And then on the next page, you'll see our grants. Our department also provides a grants function for community development and other departments because this is my specialty. I have written over $5 million in grant requests that have brought in over $3 million for the city. As the mayor said last 2 weeks ago, to bring in even more money into our community, I have held a free grants workshop series for local nonprofits, and they completed a grant application by the end. I hope to offer that workshop regularly. What is our vision for community development? Last page. I was hired to expand the department and bring in grants, and I've done that. Going forward, we want to continue to assist residents to improve their neighborhoods and the homes and businesses within them. This includes a focus on place-based development. Just as we have seen with our thriving downtown, focusing attention and resources on a specific place brings revitalization. We hope to do that in all of our neighborhoods throughout the city. We will continue our work with the county and our housing coalition partners to create new units of affordable housing, both new construction and rehab for homeowners and renters, to keep Lancaster affordable for workers, people with special needs, and the homeless. Also, there are new grants that we would like to pursue, including the state's CHIP program for housing rehab that we've had in the past. There's a HUD program for home modifications for older adults, and transportation grants for walking, biking, and rolling mobility, and others that we have yet to identify. That's it.
Any questions for Linda? Mr. Ayers?
So earlier you said you had 7 projects in the pipeline, just over the length of your lead hazard grant, how many have you completed?
We have not completed any. We have done assessments.
Okay.
But we have not completed any lead abatement projects yet.
And how many assessments have you done, do you know?
I don't have
No,
that off the
that's all
top
right.
of my head, but
That's all right.
several. Yeah.
Okay.
Additional questions? Mr. James?
Just one quick question. Do you have some good contractors lined up? Because that's kind of the key to making all this happen. How many do
We
you
do
have?
not have many, but we have some. There are contractors that do environmental remediation, and part of the grant is to build the capacity to do that. So we've held some trainings to get local contractors and help them get their certification for that type of work. So we have a few, but we need more.
Additional questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other department updates first? Any other departmental updates? All right, I'll turn it over to President Wolf for tonight's meeting prep.
The only meeting prep we have to mention is, you even gave it to me, here it is, the 3 mil levy replacement legislation that we're gonna table the one piece, and then the other piece, 14822, will be passed so that we can get what we need from the county auditor with regard to numbers for that. And so 14222 gets tabled, 14822 is passed tonight. Other than that, I don't have anything else.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Are there any other items for finance? Any other items for finance? All right, I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make that motion.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
The regular meeting of Lancaster City Council will begin at 6:40.
You walked down the aisle and promised happily ever after. Sometimes happily ever after means ending a relationship. We know the conversations are not easy. Deciding what's best for you, your children, and your next steps takes work and communication. At Dagger Law, we know there are no monsters in a divorce, only people trying to find their way. Local, trusted, experienced. Dagger Law.
The Frankie Smith Funeral Home and Crematory in Lancaster and the Johnson Smith Funeral Home in Baltimore have a long and wonderful history of serving our community. Feel free to give us a call at 740-653-0652. Stop in and see us at either of our 2 locations, 405 North Columbus Street in Lancaster and 207 South Main Street in Baltimore. Respect for tradition, regard for change.
please join me in a word of prayer. Father, we are thankful for today and your many blessings. Thankful for this time of year. During the Advent season, we pause and reflect and prepare our hearts and minds for the coming of your Son, Jesus. We pray that you would help us to remain in that reflective spirit, that reflective mentality tonight as we go about the work set in front of us. May you lead, guide, and direct us forward, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. I hereby call this meeting of Lancaster City Council to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Looks like a baby.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Here.
Mr. Ailes? Mrs. Kreitz?
Here.
Mr. James?
Here.
Mr. Matlin?
Here.
Mr. McDaniel?
Here.
Mr. Schoonover?
Here.
Ms. Sitterly?
Here.
And Mrs. Teener?
Here.
Let the record reflect that all 9 members of Lancaster City Council are in attendance this evening. Reading and disposing of the journal.
I'd like to present the regular meeting minutes dated November 28th, 2022.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the journal.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the journal. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there reports of city officials?
Yes. Email dated November 29th, 2022 regarding the 2023 Service Committee meeting dates submitted by Ms. Sitterly. Email dated November 29th, 2022 regarding the 2023 budget questions on revenue submitted by Ms. Sitterly. Email dated November 29th, 2022 regarding council meeting January 2023 submitted by Mrs. Kreitz. Email dated November 29th, 2022 regarding 2023 Public Works Committee meeting dates submitted by Mr. Schoonover. Email dated December 1st, 2022 regarding cancellation December Water Pollution Control Committee meeting submitted by Mr. James. Email dated December 5th, 2022 regarding draft meeting minutes submitted by Ms. Sitterly. Email dated December 6th, 2022 regarding Board Commissioner reappointment submitted by Mayor David Scheffler. Email dated December 7th, 2022 regarding community development submitted by Linda Berge-Disser, Executive Director. Email dated December 7th, 2022 regarding community development submitted by President Uhl. Email dated December the 11th, 2022 regarding finance agenda submitted by Mr. McDaniel. And finally, an email dated December 12th, 2022 regarding the 2023 IT Telecom Committee meeting date submitted by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to file the reports of city officials.
Second.
A motion and a second to receive and file reports of city officials. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there any communications?
There are none to be presented.
We have no special presentations or awards tonight. Are there any petitions or memorials?
There are none to be presented.
During this time, Lancaster City Council sets time aside to allow the voters and taxpayers of the city to address City Council on any item or issue they would like. Is there anyone here who would like to address Lancaster City Council this evening? Yes, sir. Ma'am, I'm sorry, I can't see.
She has already signed.
Yes, please come forward. As you come, I'll outline the rules. During this time, you have, per the rules of council, 5 minutes to speak. We will time you and let you know when your 5 minutes is up. In addition, during this time, city council members will not respond to any questions or comments that you have, though they may choose to do so at a different time. I understand you've already signed in. If you'll please state your name and address for the record, and then you may begin.
My name is Avery Patterson. I live at 188 Sells Road in Apartment G. I'm a student at Ohio University Lancaster campus, and I currently live in low-income housing off of Sells Road at a property known as Alt Manor. I lived in southeastern Ohio all my life, and I know firsthand some of the struggles amongst small towns, villages, and cities such as the city of Lancaster. I'm here today not just for myself, but for the countless others who cannot be here because of the ongoing drug epidemic that's ravaged good counties like Fairfield County, Ohio. I've been receiving services for my own mental health and addiction issues for nearly 7 years, since before I became a resident in this county. During the pandemic, I moved here and I've received services through an agency called New Horizons for counseling, case management, supported employment, and a multitude of other services. I've lived in my apartment at 188 Sells Road for nearly a year and a half now. My experience has been less than comforting and warm and fuzzy feeling. Ever since I've lived here, there's been ongoing issues within the community and the area that I live that involve drugs and drug trafficking. I have never in my life been exposed to the multitude of occurrences as I have living off of Sells Road here in Lancaster, Ohio. Throughout all hours of the night, cars come and go within my area, sneaking, hoping to be unseen, majority of which frequent the building where I hold a residence at. Night after night, call after call, just within the past 6 months, the 6-month report for just that address and location was 16 pages long. That's just 6 months out of the year and a half that I've lived at that location, which doesn't include fire and emergency services. I live in a building that in 1 year had so many disturbance calls, eventually Lancaster Police Department decided they would no longer show up to be of service at this location. I have witnessed a multitude of suspicious vehicles to which the ledger runs off of a single page. My neighbors and I have spent countless sleepless, unsafe nights not knowing when a batch of methamphetamine would be made improperly and engulf us all in flames. We get told to be grateful to have somewhere to sleep at night, but we're never truly able to, like most of you get to when you get to go home to your families. Our building and the people in it are treated like numbers because most of us have mental health or addiction service needs. Many of our complaints went unnoticed or cared about under our previous property management, which was Fairfield Homes. As of late, we are currently under HUD property management, but before that, our lives were nothing but hell. Every day we are exposed to lingering meth chemicals while our fire panel doesn't work and it isn't properly hooked up to notify Lancaster Fire Department. Not only that, all but one of 8 apartments has no working hardwired smoke detector system, all of which have been reported and still undealt with. We have numerous amounts of lingering homeless people who couldn't get into LSS showing up and living in our building illegally. Up until a few months ago, we had no type of exterior lighting sources or cameras until we, the tenants, pushed for better safety measures. You may be asking yourself, okay, what's the problem? The problem is, in a year and a half I've lived here, police presence and response to incidents are few and far between up until recently. The fire department, alongside the building owner, are aware of the things that are happening, yet nothing has been done up until recent arrests were made, which both individuals were on Alt Manor property and in possession of illegal drugs and drug paraphernalia. I've been told for months there's nothing anyone can do, and frankly, for me, that's not good enough. In a 12-hour time frame, 2 arrests were made because I, an untrained, unarmed citizen, decided enough is enough. Had I not been outside when police arrived, they discussed just letting the individuals drive off. To me, this is the exact opposite of what their duty is to every citizen, no matter what part of town it occurs in, and that is to protect and serve. If multiple agencies are turning a blind eye to the things impacting our town, such as this drug epidemic, not only are we failing to keep people safe, but we are failing to help those still sick and suffering who can later give back and be better people within the community of Lancaster, Ohio.
Ma'am, your time is almost out. Go ahead and wrap up.
Addiction is an equal opportunity destroyer that no family is immune from, not even yours. I beg you, plead you, to treat the situation as if it were your son, daughter, mother, father, brother, or whomever that is being impacted by this gap of illness and wellness within our community. When we face the world alone, we can forget the bigger picture that we are a part of a community together. When we take I and turn it into we, illness becomes wellness. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Patterson, for being here this evening. Is there anyone else who would like to address Lancaster City Council tonight? Okay, well, thank you all for being here this evening. Reports of standing committees.
Finance Committee meeting minutes dated November 28th, 2022, and December 12th, 2022, submitted by Mr. McDaniel. Economic Development Committee meeting minutes dated November 17th, 2022, submitted by Mr. Ailes. And finally, the Service Committee meeting minutes dated December 2nd, 2022, submitted by Ms. Sitterly.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of standing committees.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file reports of standing committees. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Reports of special committees.
There are none to be presented.
We have no public hearings this evening, so we'll move to the reading of resolutions, beginning with the third reading of temporary resolution 141-22.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance, increase receipts, and to amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor in the city income tax fund 2016, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 141-22.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 141-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
This is just an annual piece to reconcile our accounts with the county auditor.
Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 141-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 142-22.
A resolution to submit to the electors of the city the question of replacement levy at a rate not to exceed 3 mills for purpose of general construction, reconstruction, resurfacing, and repair of street, roads, and bridges in the city and declaring an emergency. Offered by Mrs. Kreitz and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mrs. Kreitz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council place on the table resolution temporarily numbered 142-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to place upon the table temporary resolution 142-22. A motion to table is a privileged motion and therefore no debate is allowed. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 142-22 has been placed upon the table. Temporary resolution 143-22.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into a contract with Verdandez for engineering services offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Mr. James.
Thank you, President Noel. At this time, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon a written record temporary resolution numbered 143-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 143-22. Discussion, Mr. James.
Briefly, as a reminder, this is in the amount of $150,000 for some of the critical inspection services that we need for all the projects that we have going at the present time.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 143-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 144-22.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into a contract with Ben Warner for inspection services offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James.
Thank you again, President Noel. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon a written record temporary resolution numbered 144-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 144-22. Discussion, Mr. James.
This goes hand in hand with the previous resolution.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 144-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 147-22.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with the Fairfield County General Health District for public health services offered by Mr. McDaniel, seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 147-22.
Second?
A motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 147-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, this is the contract with Fairfield County Health Department and in the amount of $264,000.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 147-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 148-22.
A resolution to submit to the Fairfield County Auditor a request to certify the total current tax valuation of the city and The dollar amount of revenue that would be generated from a replacement levy of 3 mills for the purposes of providing funds for the general construction, reconstruction, resurfacing, and repair of streets, roads, and bridges in the city and declaring an emergency. Offered by Mrs. Kreitz and seconded by Mr. Schoonover.
Mrs. Kreitz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 148-22.
Second. We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 148-22. Discussion.
Yes, thank you. This is a resolution to request that the county auditor provide the city with a certified dollar amount that would be generated from the 3 mil levy.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 148-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 149-22.
A resolution to make appropriations for current 2023 budget expenses and other expenditures of the City of Lancaster, State of Ohio for the fiscal year 2023 and to establish line item transfers authorities for departments offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council replace resolution temporarily numbered 14922 by replacing it with resolution temporarily numbered 14922 star as given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to amend 149-22 and replace it with 149-22 star as given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Briefly, Mr. President, we talked about this in the Finance Committee meeting. Most of the changes to the budget from the original version included updates to figures that weren't available when they put the first budget out.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to amend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to amend and replace carries 9-0. We now have before us 149-22 star. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 14922 star.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 149-22 star. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, briefly, this obviously is a very significant budget in that it's invest in a lot of areas, specifically invest in police and fire as we discussed when we went out for a levy in the community and asked them to support police and fire. This will bring police staffing, fire staffing to the authorized strength, which is which will actually serve the public in a much better fashion we've been able to. Some of the reasons that the police haven't been able to respond as quickly to some calls is they've been short-staffed. We're slowly moving forward with those numbers, hiring qualified people that can do this job. It's a very difficult job for them, and hopefully that will alleviate some of the concerns about response times for both police and fire. It brings on a fourth medic at the fire department, which operates currently as staffing permits. Once we get to full staff, that should be available for most times, if not all the time. So it is a heavily discussed budget. There's a lot of areas that each of us have had conversations about. But with that said, I'll be supporting the budget.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass 149-22. Ms. Tina.
This budget's been all over the place, and this is my 9th year, and I will be voting no. One of the reasons is I see with Lancaster, which I understand, with the police department, but, you know, they complained about they didn't have air conditioning. It was terrible there. So they were complaining, oh gosh, how are we gonna pay for that? And then all of a sudden, oh, we're gonna buy this vehicle that's almost $300,000, is that right? And if you're behind having more employees, why are you making a purchase like that? I mean, that's your focus. We can use the sheriff's department, and I don't even know when the last time there was like a major drug bust here. I remember a couple years ago during the sheriff's department, or when they were running for sheriff, I don't remember a major drug bust. And I'm backing up with what this lady says. Yeah, she's right. I mean, I've even had trouble with trying to make reports on my own for things that have happened with the police department. I understand they're short-staffed, but to make a report on something when I'm told by the prosecutor's office and my attorney to go make a report and they won't do it, I mean, and I have video, that's a problem. And you know, they're kind of picking and choosing what they do. I know they're short-staffed, but, you know, I'm just not buying it. And to spend money on a vehicle like that, I am not gonna support it. Now they're talking about they're having trouble with their heater. Well, that's another expense they're gonna have to pay for. And then with senior citizens at Olivedale, you know, where's that money going? They're making money over there. I mean, is that going in with the Parks Department? Don't know. I mean, that's another issue. I will not be supporting this budget. There's other issues too with it, and I'm just not gonna support it.
Thank you, Ms. Teener. Other discussion? Last call on the budget. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
No.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
No.
Temporary Resolution 149-22 passes 7-2. We now have second reading on a series of resolutions, beginning with Temporary Resolution 152-22.
A resolution to amend Permanent Resolution 11820, authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into a contract for construction of the Lawrence Street Water Pollution Control Facility Improvement Project, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James.
Thank you, President Rule. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 152-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of Temporary Resolution 152-22. Discussion, Mr. James.
Thank you, President Rule. As a brief reminder, this increases the amount from $20 million to $21,500,000 to accommodate some of the extra things that they found at the Lawrence Street rehab project for the wastewater treatment plant.
Okay, thank you very much for the discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. James.
Thank you again, President Rule. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon a written record temporary resolution numbered 152-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record Temporary Resolution 152-22. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 152-22 passes 9-0. Temporary Resolution 155-22.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract with a qualified consultant for inspection services during the 2023 Street Improvement Paving Program, offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Ms. Sitterly.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 155-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of Temporary Resolution 155-22. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
No, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 155-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record Temporary Resolution 155-22. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
Just real quick, this is one piece to our annual street paving program. To have a consultant actually follow up and make sure the work's being done properly is a smart move on our part, and this is that piece to make that happen.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
No.
Oops. You caught me off
Come
guard.
on, Becky. All right, caught me off guard too. Temporary Resolution 155-22 passes 8-1. Temporary Resolution 156-22.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and to enter into a contract with a qualified contractor for the project known as the 2023 Street Improvement Paving Project, offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Mr. James.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to amend temporary resolution 156-22 by replacing it with temporary resolution 156-22 star as given to the clerk in writing prior to the meeting.
I will second that motion.
We have a motion and a second to amend temporary resolution 156-22 and replace it with temporary resolution 156-22 star as given to clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
As we discussed in finance, the replacement is to give us an opportunity to, when we go out to bid, hopefully help the Parks Department in terms of getting a better paving price for two different sections of Rising Park when we get to that point.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to amend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
The motion to replace and amend carries 9-0. We now have before us 156-22 star. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 156-22 star.
I will second that motion.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 156-22 star. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
No, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Mr. James.
Just as a quick comment, having done a 5K run through that park recently, it needs to be done.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 156-22 star.
I will second that motion.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 156-22 star. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
Just real quick to clarify, since we amended it to add the piece for the Parks Department, that project, if the bid is sufficient for them, that's Parks Department money and not 3 mil street levy money.
An important clarification. Thank you, Mr. Schoonover. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 156-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 157-22.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the improvement of 6th Avenue, Maple Street to Cherry Street, known as the FAI CR 502-1.34 PID 114406, offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Ms. Sitterly.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 157-22.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the the third reading of temporary resolution 157-22. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
No, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 157-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 157-22. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
Just real quick, I know we don't do a whole bunch of applause around here when we pass certain things, but the last section of Sixth Avenue that needs repaved is getting repaved with this piece, so, you know, fake round of applause, whatever. I mean, there you go.
Thank you, Mr. Schoonover. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 157-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 158-22.
A resolution to amend the 2022 appropriation budget and amend the certificate of appropriation with the county auditor, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 15822.
Second.
I think we're going to need a motion to suspend before we pass.
Oh, yes, you do. Let's do that.
Okay.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 15822.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 158-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
I will save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ailes? Excuse me, Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes? Now, don't
That's
laugh,
everybody.
because then I'll really get messed up.
See if you're paying
Let's try that again. Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Now we'll try this. Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 15822.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 158-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President. Each year, we are required to balance our expense budget so that we send certification to the county auditor that our accounts do not exceed actual cash on hand.
Okay, very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 158-22 passes 9-0. We now have first reading on a series of resolutions, beginning with temporary resolution 159-22.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and to amend the certificate of appropriation with the county auditor in the natural gas fund 6002, offered by Ms. Sitterly and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Ms. Sitterly.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 159-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 159-22. Discussion, Ms. Sitterly.
I'll save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Ms. Sitterly.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 159-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 159-22. Discussion, Ms. Sitterly.
Yes, as Mr. Waite explained in our finance meeting, we have a shortfall of approximately $800,000 due to the significant increase in the cost of natural gas.
Okay, thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
God bless you. Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 159-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 160-22.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate with the county auditor in the CDBG loan repay revolving phone, it's not a phone, revolving fund 2075, offered by Mr. Ailes and seconded by Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. Ailes.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings of resolution temporarily numbered 160-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 160-22. Discussion, Mr. Ailes. Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. Ailes.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass and engross and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 160-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 160-22. Discussion, Mr. Ailes.
$28.
$28.
That's it.
That's it. Further discussion on the motion. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 160-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 161-22.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to issue a request for qualifications, request for proposals after statements of qualifications are received, and negotiate and execute any and all documents necessary to enter into a contract for professional design services to facilitate the design and installation of a new HVAC system for the Lancaster Police Department, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 161-22.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 161-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
I will save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 161-22.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 161-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, this is the long-discussed HVAC system. I believe the amount is estimated to be somewhere around 1.3 million. This allows us to start moving that project forward and hopefully get it replaced soon.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 161-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 162-22.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency Water Pollution Control Loan Fund Program and to execute contracts as required, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James.
Thank you, President Dole. At this time, I would like to ask, or I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution numbered I've lost my track here, 162-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 162-22. Discussion, Mr. James.
The reason for suspension request is that time is of the essence to get these kind of applications in, and the quicker we do it, the better opportunity we have to receive them.
Great, thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. James.
Thank you, President Dole. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon a written record temporary resolution numbered 162-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 162-22. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 162-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 163-22.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to enter into a change order for the concentrate line cleaning project, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Mr. James.
Thank you again, President Dole. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution number 163-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules, waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 163-22. Discussion, Mr. James?
Just briefly, this is the illustrious concentrate line that we've exceeded some of the money we'd already appropriated, is now 144,000 and some change versus 100,000. This gives us the opportunity to clear up the change notice at the end of this year.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. James?
Thank you again, President Newell. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution numbered 163-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 163-22. Discussion, Mr. James?
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 163-22 passes 9-0. Are there any further resolutions to come before Lancaster City Council? If not, we'll move to the reading of ordinances, beginning with third reading of temporary ordinance 33-22 star.
An ordinance to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for management and professional personnel employed by the city of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2023 and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 33-22 star.
If you want to make that motion, that's what we'll do.
Actually, I'm going to withdraw that motion for a moment.
Okay.
I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ayers.
Mr. Ayers?
Thank you, Mr. McDaniel. Mr. President, I would like to make a motion to replace temporary ordinance 33-22 star with temporary ordinance 33-22 star.
Second.
We have a motion to amend temporary ordinance 33-22 star and replace it with temporary ordinance 33-22 star. Discussion, Mr. Ayers?
Nothing further from Finance Committee.
Further discussion on the motion to amend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
The motion to amend and replace passes 9-0. We now have before us temporary ordinance 33-22 star. Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, Mr. President. Now I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 33-22 star.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 33-22 star. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel?
Briefly, Mr. President, this obviously, as the title implies, it establishes the benefits and compensation for management and professional personnel for the city of Lancaster.
Thank you very much for the discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 33-22 star passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 34-22 star.
An ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for those employees who are not members of the recognized bargaining units employed by the city of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2023 and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 34-22 star.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 34-22 star. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, Mr. President, this is for our non-union employees working for the city.
Thank you for the discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 34-22 star passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 35-22.
An ordinance to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for Fairfield County Municipal Court Management and professional personnel employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio for the fiscal year 2023 and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 3522.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 35-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
This is the benefit and compensation ordinance for municipal court management and professional personnel.
Thank you very much. Further discussion, the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 35-22 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 36-22.
An ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for Fairfield County Municipal Court judicial and probational personnel employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2023 and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered, 3622 star. I'm sorry,
Second.
no star. No, my apologies.
Just regular.
Yeah, I'm ahead of the curve here.
36-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 36-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
This is the benefit and compensation package for Muni Court judicial and probation employees.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 36-22 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 37-22.
An ordinance to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for the Information Technology Administrator, Office of the Clerk of Court employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio, commencing the first pay period of 2023 and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 3722.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 37-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
This is for the IT administrator for the Office of the Clerk of Courts.
Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 37-22 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 38-22.
An ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for transit personnel employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2023 and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 3822.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 38-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, this establishes pay and benefits for transit personnel.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 38-22 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 39-22.
An ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for seasonal interns employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio, commencing during the summer of 2023 and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. McDaniel, seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel. Excuse me.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 3922.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 39-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
This will establish pay and benefits for seasonal interns.
Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 39-22 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 40-22.
An ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for Parks and Recreation personnel employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2023 and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 40-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 40-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, this is for our Parks and Recreation personnel.
Further discussion on the motion to pass? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 40-22 passes 9-0. We now have second reading on temporary ordinance 43-22.
An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of notes in the maximum principal amount of $975,000 in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying the cost of the construction and replacement of Miller Park Water Treatment Plant and the acquisition of real property and appurtenances necessary therefore, and the acquisition, construction and installation of wells, raw water distribution piping, approximately 5,300 feet of water lines, new fire hydrants and appurtenances along Wiley Road and Magna Avenue between certain termini, each including design and engineering work, and together with all necessary appurtenances thereto, and declaring an emergency. Offered by Mr. McDaniel, seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporary number 43-22.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 43-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
I will save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 43-22 is now suspended. Motion to suspend passes. We are now on the motion to pass. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 43-22.
Second?
A motion and a second to pass and engross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 43-22. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President. Last year, we passed ordinance 47-21 in the amount of $1,475,000. This will allow us to issue and sell new notes in the amount of $975,000 to continue with this project.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 43-22 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 44-22.
An ordinance establishing a new chapter 1130 of the Lancaster Codified Ordinances entitled Solar Energy Systems and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. Ayers and seconded by Ms. Sitterly.
Mr. Ayers.
This will be the second of third readings with a public hearing on January 9th at 6:30 p.m.
Very good. Second of three readings then on temporary ordinance 44-22. We have no ordinances for first reading. Are there any further ordinances to come before Lancaster City Council? If not, we have no tabled legislation. Is there any unfinished business tonight? Is there any new business tonight? Mr. Ayers.
Yeah, I would like, I don't know if she's still here, but the taxpayer that came and spoke, you know, I know I'm only 21, but ever since I've lived here, I think my whole family and most of my friends know Sells Road is not a nice place to be around. I had friends who lived in those apartments over there, and I mean, it's exactly as that woman describes, a mess. It's something, you know, you don't feel safe there. I think, you know, as a city, I'm not saying we don't do anything. I would just hope that, you know, maybe there's extra discussion and extra time put into that. As well, I think, you know, that Avery, I think her name was, she shows why we have a community development office, because that's something that office would be able to help, you know, find affordable housing and other safe places for them to go live at.
Thank you, Mr. Ayers. Further new business this evening. Mr. Mayor.
This is where we bring up the reappointments to boards and commissions.
Yes. You received an email from the mayor asking for several reappointments. Mr. Charles Elsey to the Parks Board for a 3-year term. Mr. Ron Burst, Port Authority Board for a 4-year term. Mr. Brian Everett to Historic Lancaster Commission for 2 years. Ms. Joyce Harvey, Historic Lancaster Commission 2 years. Debbie Stemble, Historic Lancaster Commission 2 years. Matt Brady, Historic Lancaster Commission for 2 years. And Jason Annecy for the Historic Lancaster Commission 2-year term. Is there a motion to appoint these as they have been requested?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Matlin. We have a motion to appoint. Is there a second?
I will
Mr.
second that
McDaniel has seconded it. Is there any discussion? Need a roll call? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Abstain.
And Ms. Teener?
No.
The motion to appoint those as they were described carries 7-1 with one abstention. Further new business this evening. All right, then, we'll ask that the clerk read our announcement of scheduled meetings.
The next regular scheduled meeting for Lancaster City Council is January 9th at 6:30 PM. At that meeting, we will have a public hearing on temporary ordinance 44-22. The meeting following is January 23rd at 6 PM here in council chambers as well. Upcoming committee meetings for the next 30 days. Code Enforcement, January 9th at 7:30 AM at the 1897 Conference Room. Finance, January 9th at 6 PM here in council chambers. And finally, the Water Pollution on January the 11th at 8:30 PM in the 1897 Conference Room.
Thank you very much. Are there any bills?
There's two. Publication of legislation in the MNCO, $120.30, and publications of notice of a public hearing in MNCO, $97.55. Both of those are payable on our PNC card in the amount of total $217.85.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to pay the bills.
Second.
A motion and a second to pay the bills. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. I know of no need for an executive session. If there is not one, then a motion to adjourn is in order.
Mr. President, I'd like to make that motion. We adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Since this is our last meeting, let me say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all of you. Have a safe and happy holiday. We'll see you in the new year. Please remember to sign your legislation. We are adjourned.